this issue has now reached a particular stage with the Manx government and net zero transition team you have, which is quite absurd. It's maybe quite a good psychological study because they're faced with something which is incredible. That you're different to the rest of the world. You're so different that you can get between 60 and 74% of the energy out of the wind in your inshore wind farm. No one else in the world can do this. No one. And this is in a case where you're surrounded by countries like Ireland, Wales, England and Scotland, who are getting in the high 20s, 27, 28, some of them, some farms can get 34%. But that's what you're faced with. But, oh, no, you are claiming 60 to 70%. Your way around this is a combination of stonewalling me while letting little bits of information out. Now, Manx News wrote to your transition team and they had an answer back. And that an answer enables me to confirm that they are delusional. There's no doubt about this. So the only question is, when will you find out about this delusion? I'm keen that the Manx people aren't loaded with a very expensive energy system because cheap energy is the source of all prosperity. It's going to affect your tourism industry, every industry. It's going to affect every part of your lives because you're going to be saddled with a white elephant. You're going to be saddled with costs for decades to come that are ridiculous. That is what I am saying. And I'm basing it on the fact that I don't think you are different to the rest of the world. I do think you have to obey the rules of things around you. And what they're saying in principle is, oh no, but this particular spot is so great. We fed it into the turbine thing and it's coming out. We know we're right. But the people doing this haven't got a clue what they're talking about. I mean, I've had already maybe almost an hour discussion on Manx Radio with your Green Party leader who doesn't understand a single thing about anything to do with the issue and just spent the whole time trying to insult me. I've had lots of little personal attacks from people, all of whom seem to be associated with the project in one way or the other. They're either the sustainability people or they're the PR people for the transition, for the wind farms, things like that. You even hold meetings of people called a debate, which I'll be going into in another video, which isn't a debate. You hold a 12-minute meeting of everyone who agrees and call it a debate. This is the actions of children. This is the actions of a child responding to me. My claim is very, very simple, and it's to the Manx people. All you have to do to see if I'm right or they're right is check to an outside authority on whether the 60 to 74% load factor is reasonable for you, or for anyone for that matter, but for you. No outside authority will agree. Or go to your turbine manufacturer and ask them, will you warrant this? Will you warrant this sort of yield? They won't. They can't. So the only reason you're so far down this road is because you are buying the equipment. You're the new kid on the block who's being fooled. And you're being fooled by your own team, actually, of wishful thinkers, because they're driving an agenda. They're not trying to find out what's best for you. They're claiming things like cheap electricity. I've just had someone claim, well, you come back in a year when we've done the wind farm and see how cheap our electricity is, less than 4p a kilowatt hour, and that. Total nonsense, just their interest charges alone on the borrowing are in that sort of order. So you are living in a delusion, and it's not your fault, the Manx people. And my job is to stop the waste. I have got no skin in the game other than the satisfaction of stopping some total madness, where there is a possibility, where there is a small enough community for the people to rise up and say, yes, government, just check outside. That's all I'm asking them to do. Check outside, because the moment they go outside, give me in writing from any authority that 60 to 74% is what you can expect from your of the wind energy that's there, that you can expect to get from your wind farm proposal. And you can't. It's as simple as that. But now, as promised, I'm going to go into more detail on this and explain it. It is simple what I'm saying. There's nothing magic about it. It is very, very simple. And they will try and make it complicated. They will try and call me names, they will try to do anything except actually deal with the issue. And when they do come up with points, they don't openly debate me. Oh, no, no, no. They do it in little Facebook groups where I don't have access. And then they'll say, I haven't got time to waste time on this. But they don't debate. The reason is they can't. The reason is you're being led by people who do not know what they're doing. Full stop. Anyway, let's get on with the show. I've been through this many times in previous videos, so I'll quickly whip through it. What is the load factor? Very simple. It's what percentage of electricity you get out of a theoretical limit based on perfect wind every second of the year. So in this case, there's 8,760 hours in a year. We got 20 megawatts, so if it was perfectly blowing at the perfect speed every second of the year, we get 20 times 8,760 is 175,200 megawatt hours, which is 175.2 gigawatt hours. That is the perfect wind situation that exists nowhere on Earth. We get a percentage of that out. And what actually percentage we get out by measuring the electricity we get out, that's the load factor. And the official figures are, in England, we get 25.6%, Northern Ireland 26.8%, Scotland 28.4%, Wales 27.4%, Ireland 27%. But what does the Isle of Man get? The Isle of Man gets, unbelievable, the world record of up to 74%. An amazing, a world record, almost treble what the rest of the UK and Ireland can get. Almost treble what the world gets, even more than any offshore wind farm. It is an unbelievable figure, but it is only possible because your transition team, when they see this figure, have no understanding that they're actually breaking the laws of physics and they're way outside what the industry knows to be true. You do not have to believe me for how absurd this figure is. You have to go to any independent source outside the bubble that this team are in inside the Isle of Man and ask them, or ask the turbine manufacturers, will they guarantee such load factors? Because they won't. And no wind farm in the world builds on anything like this. This is a graph from the UK government showing all the 4 parts of the UK and the UK average in black of the load factors over the years here since 2010. The facts are that they don't really change very much. What changes them is the amount of wind that year, and that can vary by 24% from year to year. But the actual load factors themselves don't really change. As regards turbines, yeah, the higher the turbine, you'll have a higher load factor because you'll get better winds the higher up. But that's for a given turbine, right? The load factors in themselves then will not change. So if you put any turbine up anywhere, it's going to have its load factor and that's going to carry on. They do deteriorate a bit, obviously, with time. And what you should base load factors on is the lifetime load factor, which is the sort of average you expect over its lifetime, because the wind vanes become less efficient and things like that. So that's a fact. So myth dispelled. In the UK, wind farms are paid not just for the amount of energy they supply, but they're paid for what they could supply even when we don't need it. Let's explain. Overnight, demand drops, but it's stormy and the wind's got a lot of power. It's got too much power. We still have to pay for it. It's called a constraint payment. So the payments in the UK are paid on what the potential of the wind farm is to generate power. It includes what we call the constraints. So on this table here, when I calculated those load factors on the right of the first 7 in the table, I included the constraint energy. So in other words, this idea from the Isle of Man that somehow the load factors in the UK are wrong, that they're too low, is wrong. Typically, from the people who have an interest in this project and perpetuating this, what I consider almost a crime onto the Isle of Man people, Stephen Elkins here recently wrote this on Facebook, and it shows the total misunderstanding. I'll read it out. Scotland has too much wind for the turbines installed, Most of Scotland's energy heads to England. It is the capacity of those interconnectors which is the limiting factor currently for Scotland. That is why, when a loaded chart showing load factors is produced, where they have to curtail a large part of the energy as proof that the wind turbines are producing less power than they should, the Isle of Man would not have any curtailment. A total misunderstanding. So let me put him right. He's quite right. The limiting factor on Scottish wind farms is the ability to convey that energy to England. Yeah, it's a marvellous system, isn't it? We build wind farms that we can't use electricity of, but we still have to pay. Fact. But as per the table I showed, and the table he's referring to, the load factors always include the curtailment. So in other words, the load factors are the total amount of energy that the wind farm is capable of producing, full stop. We do not deduct to reduce the load factor. We include it. Again, I'm dealing with children here as regards knowledge of their own subject, right across the Isle of Man team. So another myth, discarded. The Isle of Man's plan is for 20 megawatts onshore wind, and there's a big difference between onshore and offshore. Just look at some of these figures. Basically, offshore can be up to 50% more wind available, more energy available than onshore. In the UK, on average, it's 40% more energy available from offshore than onshore. So the load factors are 40% bigger. Well, this is a simple bar chart. The blue bars are the onshore wind load factors, and the black bars are the offshore wind load factors. Please note the black bars always higher than the blue bars. Always, because offshore wind gets a bigger load factor all the time. And if you look at the figures there, the offshore goes from about 30 to just over 40%, say about 44% peak there. Whereas the onshore goes from about 20 to, well, not quite 30 on average. So there's around about a 10-point difference between the two, right? There is no exception to this anywhere in the world. Offshore beats onshore in terms of load factor. Why is this so important? Well, you'll find out why. Because the Isle of Man has it the other way around, and not just slightly, but by a mile. So here you are with the Isle of Man on the map, and the windrows is below it there. You can just see where the direction and strength of the wind is coming from most of the time. It's prevailing southwesterly. Ireland obviously does get in the way of that for you, but there's some tunnelling around, etc. Let's look then all the load factors that surround the Isle of Man. Well, we'll start with Scotland at 28.4, and then Wales at 27.4, and then Ireland at 27, and then England at 25.6. Not forgetting Northern Ireland at 26.8. That's what surrounds the Isle of Man. And don't forget, Ireland, for example, has an extremely windy west coast. Now, all those are onshore wind farms. And all of the readings there are actual readings. They're not theory, they're not calculations, they're the observations. They're on average what the wind farms produce. But there is one wind farm very near to the Isle of Man. It's a large one. It's Walney, and it's right in the middle of the sea, just there. Now, as you would expect, Walney, being an offshore wind farm, would get a much higher load factor than the onshore ones. And yes, it does. And here it is. The last 12 months averaging about 40, 41, and longer term about 45. Now, based on all the evidence, I gave the Isle of Man a load factor in the particular location we're talking about in the woods there, 27%. I would point out that the turbines do not clear the trees by very much, so you're going to get a lot of air disturbance, if you like, and shear effects that are going to limit the amount of energy, but 27% seem reasonable. Now, in this particular case, you're putting the wind turbines in woods, one of the worst places you can put them because of air disturbance, and you're not clearing the top of the trees by very much. Most wind farms would insist that all the trees in that forest be taken down, so that from every direction the wind can have, if you like, unfiltered access. And that is not being asked for, as far as I know. So even if it was, it wouldn't change it by very much. But I asked an expert in the field, a man who's been involved with it every day for the last 15 years or so, how much he would expect from a wind farm in this location. And that was without the trees. And his answer was quite interesting. He's anonymous because people don't want to put their head above the parapet to have all the sort of personal abuse you get when you do that, like me. I'm just maybe foolish in doing it. But here is his opinion. But his opinion is based on not 150 metres, but 200 metres on a bigger turbine. It's the 200 metres that makes the difference. So what load factor does he come up with? I quote, "There seems to be a 20 megawatt onshore project proposed for Ernstein by Manx Utilities. That would be 4 times 5 megawatt turbines. A load factor for 45 for those turbines is complete nonsense. Even the best sites in Scotland, which are as windy as the Isle of Man, don't get close to that over the longer term. The advantages of the bigger turbines are vastly overstated. The higher and more stable wind speeds due to a taller hub height adds perhaps 5 percentage points to the long-run load factor. 35% may be reasonable, but that is based on a 200-metre high turbine. What we've actually got is a 150-metre high turbine, so it's 50 metre down nearer the ground and nearer the woods, and therefore I think that at least the 27% would be a reasonable factor. But let's say 27 to 30. And there's an expert commenting on this, and note how he rejects the 45 percentage points there that they are claiming in their defence, and I'll be going into in some detail. So from an expert there in the wind farm industry, that's what he thinks. What you should notice there is that is a consultant to the wind farm industry, by the way, that person, and he's paid to advise them. But the point he's making at 45% is absurd. A 45% load factor for Erstein's absurd. You're talking in Erstein of 60 to 74%. This is how out of focus it is when he is totally rejecting out of hand 45%. But you know, that's just, if you like, an appeal to authority by me. Yes? So, you know, what I'm doing is actually comparing it to the measured things all around you. So let's go back to that. So there we are with all the load factors around the Isle of Man and my estimate of about 27%. And the offshore wind farm there, that goes up to 45%, although often only giving 40%. But what are you predicting again? You're predicting 60 to 74%. Much more than the offshore wind farm almost alongside you there, that you can actually see from the Isle of Man. This is surely an indicator to anyone with more than one peanut in their brain to actually understand there's something wrong here. But no, having had this pointed out, you defend it, and here is your defence in a response to Manx News. Manx Utilities cannot verify the load factors being quoted by Mr. Burgess, but can advise. Well, I'm going to stop there. I actually published the table from the British government with those load factors on. That's a table from the British government, but somehow they can't verify it. I mean, that is an absurd opening and deceitful line, quite frankly. They're pretending they're sort of my figures. Yes, I've guessed at about the 27%, but all the factors I've just surrounded the Isle of Man with are from the official government records, and the table I originally published on my Isle of Man videos was the exact table out of the British government. Nevertheless, let's continue. But can advise that the UK's own figures suggest the average load factor of projects commissioning in 2023 is 45%. Our source of this data is from 2023 report, and they go on to give the source. This is the 45% that has just been debunked by the expert, by the way, but let me explain that 45% now. This is what was written to me by that energy insider expert. Finally, the desert generation costs are known by everyone in the business to be pure fantasy. Just to explain that pseudonym there, it stands for Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, which is the energy department in the British government. There was a simple test in 2023. By the way, that's when they came up with these absurd figures like 45%, invented out of thin air, basically. Nothing like what was actually happening in the field and measured. So I'll carry on. Was anyone willing to bid for CFD contracts in 2023 with a maximum cap on the strike price based on the DESNES figures? That's the 45% figure. None were. And DESNs were forced to increase the cap by 70%. They came up with these absurd costs about 4 years ago and have been the laughingstock ever since. The problem was they didn't understand that the CFD bidders were playing games with the rules and believed that the bids reflected real costs. I'm going to explain that in normal language now. So in the real world, imagine you're in the business of providing wind farms, and imagine, just as we know, the measured factors you get, the measured load factors, we're in the region of, let's say, 27%, in that sort of region. Obviously, you can adjust these slightly depending on where you are and so on, but that's about it. Then up come the Department of Energy with an idea that it's not 27 or 28 around there, it's 45. No reason for this. This is not measured, by the way, but our models think it's what it should be, right? Well, what do you do? Well, they go out to contract to you based on that, and you're not interested because your real costs are based on 27. In fact, you'd have to increase the price you're being offered, not based on 45, but based on 27. You'd have to increase that 27% by about 70% to get to the equivalent to the 45. Now everyone's happy. The Department of Energy carriage can carry on the Emperor's carriage, and they can pretend everyone's happy because they're getting the 45%. The crowd here, which are the wind farm suppliers, the people who make the money out of wind farms, are happy because they've got a 70% part of cash increase to compensate, and we can all carry on pretending. That is the world. The only problem is that Manx Utilities don't know about this. They still think he's got clothes on, the Emperor. Well, carrying on with the response from Manx Utilities, they're going on with a true word salad here. They go on about load factors. The expected annual generation as a percentage of theoretical maximum generation are modelled to increase with turbine size. Larger turbines are expected to reduce higher load factors for several reasons. Most importantly, the larger turbines can access higher winds due to the increased height. That's true, but you haven't got a very high one. And that the wind farm with fewer larger turbines has increased efficiency. That's true by a few percent, but it's already factored in. Detailed discussion of these relationships can be found in a report for the department by DNV, GL Energy, DESNES, and the state that the future load factors were calculated by combining a theoretical turbine power curve, power output as a function of wind speed, modelled using turbine specifications provided by the manufacturers, with hourly wind speed data of existing offshore, not onshore, offshore wind sites. We know that the data we've gathered to date that air-stern wind speeds are above average for an onshore wind farm. Well, they would be, wouldn't they? You've just modelled on offshore, so you would get more than the onshore wind farm. That is a meaningless load of tripe, actually. You know, it contains, as a lot of tripe does, some elements of truth. The higher you go with a wind turbine, you access better winds. True. But that's already allowed for. You've only got 150 metres here. That's high compared to lots. But, you know, it's not far above the woods. And as you can see, the expert said at 200 metres, you're only getting 33%. So what are you going to be getting at 150 metres? And the factor of the forest. You're nowhere near the 60 to 74%. But so that's just a word salad there of meaningless tripe. And the fact you use offshore wind sites is ridiculous, as I've already explained. They're not similar at all. So 10 out of 10 for a meaningless copy and paste, but 0 out of 10 for any logic or support for even 45%, let alone the 60 to 74%. Well, you couldn't imagine it get much worse, but it does, so I'll continue with their response. It should be noted that these UK figures do include curtailment and projects commissioned on sites with much lower wind speeds than those which have been demonstrably measured at Erstein. Number one is this curtailment. It has no effect. The curtails was not taken into account with those load factors I've been quoting. This is a mistake I've explained earlier, but it seems even Manx Utilities have made the mistake of thinking that somehow the load factors are lowered by curtailment. They're not, because the load factors include everything. They include what power is given out and what power could have been given out that they were asked not to. So it's the total gross power. That's what all the load factors are based on. And right from my first video with that table, that was made crystal clear. You only had to look at the numbers I provided to see that, because I gave the curtailment and the generated, added them together to get the load factors. Right, on the next bit about wind speeds, well, actually, some of them are higher, some of them are lower, but they're all within the range, actually. This is the point. But again, they go on about measurement. Do you know how long they've measured the wind speeds at Erskine for? They've measured it with a SOBAR unit between September and March. That's it, one winter season. The recommended one is 5 years to measure, but I expect that it's difficult to do that all the time, but at least a few years. But what you don't do is just measure one winter, and that's what they did. This next part is unbelievable. It's a bit like a 12-year-old school kids project where they're grasping for any ideas and don't understand they have to provide data and figures to support any conclusions. Anyway, let's read it. It should also be noted that remote island wind farm projects such as the Isle of Man or the Shetland Isles. Can I first of all say the Shetland Isles is actually nearer to the Arctic Circle than it is to the Isle of Man. The Shetland Isles is out there in the oceans, completely exposed. It hasn't got Ireland, England, Scotland, etc. around it. You know, the wind speeds there are much higher. But no, let's stick our islands together, Amazingly, no actual data at all, but going on to compare to the Shetland Islands again. Now, I examined the Shetland Islands just for a matter of interest, although they bear no relationship to the Isle of Man. I examined them, and these actually are the years I had data for. I couldn't find data for other years, but I did find the report from the Energy Authority in the UK claiming, over 50% for 5 years. I can't find the data for that, and it's something that puzzles me. But it doesn't matter, because here it is. The Shetland Islands claim a world record at 52%. A world record of 52%, but you're going to 74%. You are way past the Shetlands. You're way past the world record. Your 74% is about 40% past the world record. Not just a little bit, way, way past. So frankly, if I was a teacher here, I'd say to the kids preparing this report, look, you've got to base your report on data, on information. You've got to link it with data to the Shetlands. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. But no, here we've got the school kids in charge. So this is the next part of the response from Manx Utilities. Manx Utilities has quoted the potential yield of 149 gigawatt hours for a specific 26.4 megawatt wind farm at Erskine. Let's stop there. This is the mystery 149 gigawatt hours, which based on a 20 megawatt wind farm was 85% factor, 85% load factor. But in actual fact, it's a bigger wind farm that you're not having. So this is just a red herring. But it did enable you to claim all sorts of bigger emissions, etc., than you're actually having. Great way to mislead people. Here they try to confuse and impress with some technical stuff, but I'll make it very simple for you. The knowable data set is a theoretical data set. It's a good data set, and it's designed to give a rough idea of the load factors. And you can look it up and say, this is what the wind we should have. It's not the actual measured wind allocation. Let me make that clear. Normally what people do when they're going to build a wind farm, and they need to know what they're going to get. They need to know what money they're going to make. And so they actually put up wind speed monitoring devices for a number of years to give them a reasonable estimate, because an individual year can be 20-25% different to another one. But this is a theoretical one. But here's the amazing statement at the end of this technical work. It is not assumed that any curtailment will be required for Erskine, given the maximum outputs lower than the current minimum demand. Totally agree. Load factors have not been quoted for this option, but the point is that local data does support our analysis that energy yield will be significant at this location. Oh, we're just guessing now, because we measured it for a winter, and we think, oh yeah, it's going to be more. Load factors not important, but you're quoting them. You're quoting load factors by giving the yields of 130 gigawatt hours. That is a load factor of 74%. You could not make this up. In the last paragraph of their defence, Manx Utilities state the wind speeds which have been measured so far have been higher than knowable data set and higher yields would be anticipated than those quoted in the DENS report. This is meaningless. They haven't actually given any figures. What they're claiming is 40% higher or so than the world record up in the Shetland Islands. These are children. This is not a report. This is not someone who's technically competent writing a response. I can't believe the inadequacy of this response by Manx Utilities. And frankly, if you citizens in the island put up with this, well, I don't know, you deserve it then. I mean, this is just absurd at every level. The cop-out they have is, we have explained, however, that the project is at the development phase. When you publish things like this, which are completely untrue, which are about 300% out of kilter, and the way you've calculated costs, the way you've done everything, is an agenda. It is not a decent, proper, scientific or technical study of the project. You are the laughingstock of the world. This sort of nonsense you put forward, you deserve to be. Well, words fail me with the adequacy of the response from Manx Utilities. In this video, I've tried to explain the background. I've tried to explain how stupid this is. This is part 2 of the series, by the way. There are more parts to come. But this is the most important part because it shows that fundamentally the entire project is flawed. You're not going to be anything like the within budget, by the way. You're going to go way past that. So you're actually spending tens and tens of millions of pounds. You're going to destroy the bird population up in that wood. You're going to destroy any bats that are there, etc. You're going to have a lot of environmental damage. For what? For what? For nothing. Just some virtue signalling by your leaders who are completely out of their depth on this. Completely. I'm lost for words. I'm sorry. I can't believe that having warned your leaders of this, they come up with this as a sort of defence. It is like, I can imagine it's a gang of 12 or 13-year-old kids in a school being given this project and having to be guided. Only these kids think they know what to do and they can't take the guidance. That is about the level of it, actually. I'm just going to leave you with, don't forget, 60 to 74% load factors, yeah? That you're way past the Shetlands, way past, the Shetlands, quite near the Arctic Circle, really. You're way past that. You're way past anyone else in the world under your calculations. You publish documents like I've just shown you that totally mislead you, the public, in the Isle of Man, and you expect to just stonewall me. Well, all you have to do, citizens, is insist they get outside reference. And once they've got the outside reference, it'll tell them that the 60 to 74% is wrong. And once it's told them it's wrong, they should sack the entire team. You can't trust anyone in that team that's resulted in this. Just look at these offshore numbers, much higher than onshore. Just look at the scrolling list of offshore farms around you. You knock all these into a cocked hat because you're 60 to 74%. Well, thank you for watching. I'm doing all I can to stop the madness. That's all I can say. And you really have to, as a population, rise up and say, let's get this checked outside. Let's get it checked outside. And all you have to do is check the 60 to 74% load factor, whether that's reasonable for an onshore wind farm. That's all you have to do. And the answer will come back, no, that's absurd. It's just out of the court completely. At that point, you have to stop what you're doing. Stop spending the money you're now spending, because what they want to do is force this through. They say, oh, it's still in the early stages. No, it isn't. They're doing all sorts of work, spending millions of your money, yes, whilst they try to progress this. It's an agenda. It's got nothing to do with science, nothing to do with technology, and a great deal to do with virtue signaling and incompetence.